Welcome to Biodynamic Conversations, celebrating 100 years of biodynamic agriculture. It is an honor to be in the room with you today, and we deeply appreciate you carving out the space, making time to join these conversations and to glean and learn from the speakers that we have invited into the room with us. And we know how full your days are as farmers and gardeners and stewards of the earth. So to carve out this space means a lot to us. So thank you for creating the space and creating the time and for joining us. And we are in for a treat with Robby Gass. If you have seen him in the Soil Summit, you already know that this man's wisdom and life experience with his hands in the soil and his feet on the ground is deep and wide. He has farmed conventionally, so he has that experience of farming with chemicals and what we call conventional agriculture, and he's seen the impact of that and noticed that he wanted to do something differently and has been practicing biodynamics and organic agriculture now for how long? Decades? What can we say, decades, Robby? Yeah, decades.
Yes.
And so he is not just a farmer, he's also a soil scientist and has done training with Dr. Lane Ingham's soil food web training. He also studied soil science in university. And so he's coming to us with this really rich perspective of practical and book and science. And also he practices biodynamics, which one of the things I love about Robby is he's really able to capture what is special about biodynamics. And we're going to go into that today, the biology of biodynamics. What does that mean? And how can you really glean from that and deepen into that wisdom in your own practices with your farming and gardening experience, and with in just collaborating with nature and connecting more deeply with the rhythms of nature. So with that, welcome to the room, Robby Gass. It's an honor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's every time an honor to do any of these talks. It's so nice for you guys to make this available to everybody. I often think if I had this 30 years ago, I would have learned so much more, so much quicker. Could have saved me a lot of money, making no mistakes, learning from other people's mistakes, because that's how we learn. We learn from our mistakes.
So true.
So, yeah, when we spoke about what we could talk about, it was an open discussion, and we both stumbled across this heading because we realized that there's this 100 years since Dr. Rudolf Steiner gave his lectures, the 8 lectures on what he put as biodynamic farming, and bio being life, dynamics being the changing of life, the rhythm of life. It never stops. It's like climate change. It'll never stop. It's always there, has been. It's never, that's part of life. This is 100 years now. And I'm actually honored to go in June. I'm going to be at Kuberwitz, where he did that delivery of those lectures. It's quite exciting to think that I'll stand in the room where 100 years ago the man delivered the lectures. Anyway, so one of the things that came up to me when we were redoing the lectures not so long ago in March, we went through all 8 of them in 4 days, and it was a punch exercise, but the way I like to do them. With Thilo in Nova Scotia, he really knows that content very well. And what struck me as a soil food web scientist was the comment made way back then that we shouldn't concentrate only on what's in the microscope, but what is on the macroscope.
Yeah.
And so as a guy, as a microscope man, knowing that I use the biodynamic preparations that are a combination really of, when people ask me what's so important about the preparations, I've often heard myself saying the selection of plants and animal parts used in combination is to put together all the very widest biology, the biodiversity of those contents. And then it suddenly dawns on you, no, hang on, you're missing out the other half, probably the biggest half. And that is the cosmic forces, which is the other, what gives the pulse of life.
Yes.
Then realizing that under our feet, we often say that there's more life happening in the earth than there is life around the earth. But around the earth doesn't stop at the hemisphere, outer space. It's who knows what carries on further out there, but there's so much more.
Mhm.
And we're not a thing on our own. We're part of that whole cosmic cycle of life. So we're relying on it whether we want to or not. It's part of our being. And that's where the biodynamic study, the scientific spirituality that biodynamic farming is based on, which comes from anthroposophy, which Dr. Rudolf Steiner then was an absolute, let's say, the guru of or a master of in Central Europe. He was lent on by the farmers in that part of Germany then, which is now part of Poland, to help them find a way to fix the problems they were already seeing in what chemical warfare was doing to their soil. That's not a long time of using very primal chemical amendments as fertilizer instead of manures and compost as they did before. And yet within, let's call it 10 years of using those high nitrates and phosphates, they already saw depletion in the production, predominantly of beets, which they were doing, sugar beets in that part of the world. And so they called Rudolf Steiner in to see if some of the shall I say, the estate owners there were part of his anthroposophy group. And they called on him to say, can you help us work out what we're doing wrong and how can we get life back into our soil? They already recognized that the soils were dying. This is more than 100 years ago, because then he delivered the lectures 100 years ago. So it's more than 100 years ago that they already knew from farming with fertilizer that it ain't going to do the job. It works. It makes plants grow. I grew roses in my 20s that were meter-long stems. It certainly grows plants, but it doesn't grow healthy food, and it doesn't do the earth much good. So maybe to get the ball rolling, that's a bit of background of why we're celebrating this 100-year centennial. We're celebrating the fact that 100 years ago, we got 8 lectures from a guy that knew what he was talking about and helped us to start thinking a bit differently about what we're doing. And 100 years later, we're still thinking about it. Some of us are doing something about it, but predominantly the earth is still being damaged by fertilizers and its friends, producing an enormous amount of food and developing what is commonly known by the United Nations as a hidden hunger, where we are all eating lots of food and getting very low nutrition. There's something to think about there. You know, eating a lot of food, but not really getting much nourishment. Now, why do you eat food? So growing a better quality food is probably more important than a quantity of food. But that's not how the current economics is working.
Mm.
And yet when we look at the current economics, I don't see a bright picture. I see a rather desire for change. So let us be part of that change then. We've had 100 years experience of changing, so maybe we can do something about it. So shall I go into that? It's a short slideshow. It's just to give us a few pictures to think about.
Yeah, let's do it, Robby. Yeah,
really
that's
just
awesome.
to show how we have biology and biodynamics. It's not like only the stars.
Yeah, that's
they
right.
work together.
Yeah, that's right. So true. And you know, it's so cool that you brought up the just, you know, powering through the lectures, the biodynamic lectures. I was listening to them this morning as I was getting ready for these interviews, and I was just reminded how there's this pulse on biology and how we think it's, oh, so new, you know, the biology of the soil. And Rudolf Steiner was talking about the biology of the soil 100 years ago, and he wasn't the only one. And as the questions were coming in through those agriculture lectures, and people were still then fixated on the physical, fixated on the biology of the soil, fixated on, do you use this? Do you have to do that? You know, for all the answers. And he's like, it's so much more than that. It's also what you can't see. And so I was really excited to hear that part of the lecture this morning and know that we were having this conversation to help connect people to that, to the natural forces. So let's dive in.
So these are my friends, probably the best friends we have. And these are the ones that we can see. So when you see lots of compost worms, earthworms, I was digging yesterday in the garden, I was putting some compost out, and Christelle, my wife, said to me, good grief, look at all these worms, and they're this big. They're not compost worms, they were earthworms having fun under the compost pile. So this is biology we can see. When we see lots of the worms, we know, okay, this is a good sign. That means that the biology is doing well. What we can't see there is the billions and billions of microbial beings that are living with those wonderful looking worms. So I need to move this thing so that I can remember what I'm saying. There we go. This is a slide just saying that the biodynamic farmer or gardener is conscious that the whole farm is a living organism. Now, a living organism is like a person, a microbe, a worm, a cow, a sheep, a chicken, a fertilized egg. Those are all examples of living organisms. And yet we as farmers, biodynamic farmers, are conscious of the fact that the whole farm is a living organism. And starting from the soil to the plants, animals, people, and the life-giving forces of the surrounding cosmos. Because the farm is not just a thing with a border around it and a road with some cars and things and trees and stuff. It has another border. It's called the sky, which is the cosmos. We don't know where it ends. Nobody does, by the way. They tell you it's only a few million. They tell you like it's 45, between 45 and 65 million. You know, there's only 20 million little gap there. Come on, they don't know that. Nobody knows. And so we mustn't forget about that border that we have around the farm, which is called sky or cosmos. And it's got a whole lot of stuff in it. Our rain comes from there. And they are considered one and indivisible. I want to see you try and separate your farm from the cosmos. You're not going to get it right, mate. You can even build it into a polytunnel. Doesn't matter. A little layer of plastic doesn't stop, nor does a layer of glass. And if you're standing inside a building, you can still feel the temperatures and you can hear the lightning. You're not stopping it. So it's indivisible. It is one thing. It belongs together. It's alive together. Being aware thereof and learning to work with it is what helps to produce nutritious, life-giving food. So what does that mean? It was already 1924. Now that happens to be the year when the lectures were delivered, 100 years ago. But by then it was already evident. Evidence doesn't happen one morning you wake up. Evidence means over a time period, you recognize something is happening again and again and again. This becomes evidence. It's not just suddenly one morning. So it wasn't in 1924. It was before 1924 that it was already evident that chemical approach is, and using massive arsenal, I call it an arsenal because it's stuff that was designed for making war. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and all those things was what used for making bombs. and the tools, like the good old rough tanks and things that they had in those days. How those blokes even drove in them is something crazy. But anyway, they were war machines. And when there wasn't war, they were all incorporated into agriculture, because these beautiful horses doing the work over here, who were not doing nearly as much damage to the soil, weren't good enough, big enough, fast enough. And they suddenly had a whole bunch of machines left from wartime. So we just incorporate them into agriculture. They could pull a lot stronger and they could pull a lot bigger. And so there we go. That was the start of tractor. But it's originally war machinery. So an arsenal of sophisticated chemicals to maintain soil fertility, to produce crops and control diseases, leads to a catastrophic environment disaster, which is what war does. They are so related, those two things. It's quite incredible. Chemicals could not maintain life or fertility in the soil. The quality of the food we grow and eat is directly dependent on the cosmic energy that can come into living soil, and that is what supports our daily life. Can you see the connection? The cosmic forces that come into living soil. Not dirt. Elaine Ingham speaks of dirt being sand, silt, clay, organic matter, water, and no life. That's called dirt. You add life in the sense of microbial activity and upward, like worms, and you've got soil. And the combination is fundamental. We need the cosmic energy and the living soil to produce good, nutritious food for life. This was already evident in 1924. So consciously thinking about and working with these formative forces and applying the knowledge in making biodynamic preparations is what distinguishes biodynamic farming, gardening from organic and regenerative practices. Although we are all dependent on it. So let me defend the organic and regenerative guys, because I'm one. So are you, Natalie. You're also an organic farmer. We just happen to do some biodynamic stuff as well. And my business is consulting, helping farmers to be more regenerative in their practices. Okay, so we're all the same people we're talking about here. We did a talk some time ago about the synergy between three, yeah? Mm-hmm. But in organic farmers' defense, just because you don't know about and know how to work with the cosmic forces doesn't mean you're not already doing it, because they are much bigger than us and they exist. They're there. They were there before we were. And those forces are all part of what makes things happen on Earth called life. So we are working with them, whether we want to or not. The difference is merely in biodynamic study. We've been helped by these lectures and many others since to have some tiny portion of knowledge on how to harness those forces and then help to work with them to enhance their ability, to invite them onto our land and encourage their activity without getting in their way. And that's really where the biodynamic compost and spraying preparations come in. And then our consciousness, that word right at the beginning, being conscious that this does exist and that it is there. That's what works. It's a practice that I often tell farmers when I'm working with them. Is, when last did you take your shoes off and walk the perimeter of your farm? And most of them have never done it. We drive on tractors, we get into trucks. They're nice, man, I know, I like them too. But it's necessary for a farmer to take off his shoes and walk the perimeter of his farm, because you need to talk to it. It is alive. Those billions and billions and billions of living creatures inside the soil are not feelingless. They're alive. And they see you, they hear you, they feel you, they know about you. if you are conscious of them, they will be conscious of you. This is a reality of life. You walk through the place and you see a buck standing there looking at you. That thing is alive and it saw you. It's looking at you, or it's running away from you. That's called life. That's just something you can see. Just because you can't see all the billions of life forces in and around you doesn't mean they're not there. So be conscious of them. They are there. I hope this picture is coming alive to everybody. We use a vortex, and I just thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about the vortex. You find them in galaxies. And it's literally a continuous two-way rhythmical movement of water and air expanding and contracting. So it's rhythm. And we use the stirring of preparation 500 and the stirring of preparation 501. The 500 is just a name. These names, by the way, were given almost as like a hidden code name, because at the time, this was this is like smack between end of First World War and going towards Second World War. It wasn't a kind time in Germany. And so they had to hide the biodynamic and homeopathic, those sorts of medicines and so on that at that time were being frowned upon greatly. The chemical world was in full force. It was dangerous to talk about things that were not chemical. So the preparation numbers are just code names. So preparation 500 is the horn manure, is the worded name for it. And 501 is where we use silica in a cow horn. But when we stir those before we spray them, we're forming a vortex in a drum. And we're doing that because we're pulling in and causing life pulses to work with them, so that we, on the one hand, if you're an electrical fundi, you would say that we're electrifying the water because we're forming those spins. Fine, that's agreeable. And what is electricity? We're not going to go there today, other than life force. You're stirring it well. You're oxygenating that water, because there's now air and water pulsating backwards and forwards within this thing called a vortex. So by stirring, you're almost doing what in the soil food where we study the idea of making a compost tea using an aerator to bubble. But when we form the bubble coming from the center, we're automatically forming what's similar to a vortex going around in the tank. So you see that there's nothing unusual about this stuff. It's just simpler. We didn't have an air pump then, so we just do it with a stick or a broom. So there's many ways of becoming able to form the pulsating, life-giving forces of a vortex. And if they were not life-giving forces, then why does a cyclone that can pick up a car and throw it over there, why is that a vortex? Why isn't it just a flat wind? A flat wind hasn't got the power. A vortex has power. So it befuddles me as to how anybody can think that a vortex isn't important for life. They're some of the strongest forces that we can see. This pulsating and life-bringing process is, what did I write here? Is the basis of many biodynamic practices, because creating the vortex connects us with the universal creative water rhythms within the earth, which are found in all living things. For example, the heartbeat. So although it's a vortex and it just looks like a spiral, it isn't. It's a pulsating movement, just like our heartbeat. And here is a mathematical equation that tells you how a vortex is formed. And it's everywhere. And we could have a few pictures of plants, flowers, the way that if you look at a pine cone, it actually has a vortex in two directions. You must take a pine cone one day and look at it from the top and then look at it from the side. You'll see it's got more than one spiral in it. Let's go to some bit more biology. If we look at the cow, which we use the horn of in the preparation. This, by the way, is up on where my name comes from, Gask in Scotland. Aren't they pretty? These are sentient beings. The difference you will know from the rules in biodynamic farming, organic farming, animals are considered with a lot more respect than in conventional terms. And I don't mean that all conventional farmers don't love their animals. That's absolute taboo. But when you start cramming thousands of animals into a small confined space and make them stand dead still and just eat and become meat, then you've started forgetting that they're actually sentient beings and they have feelings. As far as the cow is concerned, these are really sentient beings. They're inquisitive, they're curious, that sometimes they're naughty, they do all kinds of, they've got lots of character. And we can see them. I'll keep on telling you that because there's a whole lot of ones that you can't see that have the same living, natural ability to have feeling. When I have a sample on the microscope and there's a nematode in the screen and it's wiggling away and getting frantic, it's not its normal behavior. It's frantic. It's got this bright light shining through it and it's got trapped between two pieces of glass. So there's a microbe with feeling because it's feeling trapped. They are all sentient. It's all life. So the cow also lives with a strong connection to the cosmic forces. It's a long explanation, but there's a blood flow that goes from the gut all the way to the horn tip of the cow. If you just chop the horn off a cow, it'll bleed profusely, and you probably won't be able to stop it. When they dehorn cattle, which is a sacrilege, they have to sear it. They have to burn it. Like in the old days when a guy got a sword wound, and they love doing that in the movies. They always heat up a piece of metal and stick it onto the guy's body. Anyway, that's what they have to do with cow's horns because of the blood flow. So you can imagine the blood flow, which is in most bodies, the blood is what takes the life to a point and what brings the life back from that point. It's the living liquid. And in a cow, it runs to the tip of the horn and back. So it's taking the nutrient forms from the stomach, taking it to the tip of the horn and bringing back something, which is the cosmic forces from those two antennae that are holding up to the sky. So it's important to include the cosmic forces collected by the animals in the production of a fertile living soil. Now, a fertile living soil, as I've explained earlier on, very briefly, is sand, silt, clay particles, some organic matter. You can include stones because that's just becoming sand eventually. And for that dirt, even with water and air, to become soil needs the living organisms. So a living soil is just soil. We these days see bags of things being sold. They call it living soil. What they mean by that is that at some other stage, we looked at it on a microscope, hopefully, and we saw a whole bunch of things in there wiggling about. That's now a living soil. But anything called soil rather than dirt is actually alive with microbial activity. That's why it's soil. In the horn manure preparation, a cow horn, still containing some of the digestive forces collected during the cow's life. You know, the digestive forces are what has come from the cow in the blood to the horn. And then you fill it with the dung of a lactating cow, and preferably lactating because she's high in calcium production. And you place the horn filled with her manure into the ground. Why not just hang it in a tree? Why do we put it in the ground? Well, because in the ground, And when you're doing it as a practice, you don't get told to put it in the sandiest little spot where there's no life. You're usually told to find a good, healthy looking area, not too close to a big tree so that that can suck all the life out of the horn. And the reason for that is you want there to be a good microbial activity. You put the horn into the ground and the microbial world will work with it, decomposing that manure into a beautiful substance. But by doing that, you've brought in the digestive forces of the cow. You've brought in the cosmic energy that came to the cow, captured by the horn, and you've put it into the earth, which is constantly in touch with, because earth is part of the cosmic world. It's another planet. We just happen to be on it, but we always seem to think we're earth and those are planets. So we're one of them. We're living on a planet, and they're all in touch. They all have spheres. They all move around each other in a specific pattern. By the way, constantly changing ever so slightly, because change is inevitable. That's what life is about. And that being together, although distant, is linked together by forces. So by doing something like a biodynamic preparation, horn cow manure, we're encapsulating all of those different forces, microbial and astral, for the improvement of the fertility of our food on the whole farm, because it's not only the crop we sell, but the crops that we use on the farm. So this is biology dynamics at work. I could do this whole talk just with that picture in front of us. It's exactly what it tells you. Here's an interesting little factor. Most people that have driven past a couple of cows with calves have seen this picture. It's not always a Brahman cow, but most cows will, when a calf is suckling, you will see this where the cow is, it looks like it's licking the calf's bottom. Well, she is. Why would she do that? There's a really simple technical reason for this. She's a sensitive analytical adjustment boffin. She's feeding the calf what we call milk. She can adjust the content of the milk according to what she smells and tastes the poop of the calf to be. So by being a fantastic doctor, she can sense the calf's excrement, what it's needing in its in-food. And by doing that, naturally change the biology of the milk that she's making for the calf. That's why when we raise calves using a bottle and we have a calf mixture, which was made in a factory by some nutrition expert that says this is what a calf needs, and you buy it in a bag and you mix it with water and it never changes, it's always the same, and half the calves get diarrhea and die. It's because nobody's adjusting. When the cow is feeding her calf, she's licking its bottom and constantly adjusting the biology in the milk to suit the needs of the calf on that day. That is called biology at work, living dynamically, constantly changing, alive. I hope this picture sits in your head for a long time. This is not just a loving cow. She's doing her job. She's a walking laboratory. So the vitality and quality of soil can be improved by regular applications of preparation 500. That's the horned cow dung. Compost made with the preparations. We're not going to go into those preparations now. We can talk them another day, and we have talked them before, and there's lots of talks on them. It's not the only thing that biodynamic farming is about, but it's important to have them because they incorporate both worlds, the cosmic world and the microbial world, working together to enhance our soil. Liquid slurries made with preparation 502 and 507. Cowpat pit, that's when you take manure and you put it into like a brick-lined hole and you put the preparations into it. So instead of putting all those 502 to 507 preps into a compost pile, you just put it into cow manure. By not using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, especially herbicides, and my heart goes out to a guy who's got a field full of blackberries, because I'm fighting those things out here, and I'm looking at a herbicide. I'm wondering, I wonder if I should maybe put you to death before I try and turn that soil back into soil again. It's not easy. Avoid compaction by machinery or animals. And what I mean by that is, when the soil is wet, stay off it, because you're going to compact it to crazy amounts if you do it while it's wet, including animals. That's why it's important to get good, healthy, spongy soil before you start have cattle walking all over it, especially in a place like Scotland where it's sopping wet. But it's a challenge, and we did overcome it with biology. Keep earth covered with pasture, crop, or mulch. And in many organic practices, we use like a silage tarp at certain stages in the gardening. I don't call it a sin. It's just you need to time it properly, because you're suffocating it. There's a certain level of suffocation going on. We need to remain as aerobic as possible. But you must also understand that the gap between aerobic and anaerobic is only 2 parts per million. It's not a big gap. So if you've got a whole lot of strawy, spongy stuff on the ground and you put a plastic tarp over it, there's going to be a lot of oxygen down there for a long time. So it's not detrimental all the time. But if you keep having it covered in the thing and it becomes sort of sucked onto the ground, you're going to go anaerobic. So there isn't one hard and fast rule. It's like Till always says, you mustn't be dogmatic, yeah? And then he gives it to you in the rule, and you can't break the rules. And it's a bit of a contradiction there. Anyway, so it's interesting. Every place is different. And then minimal tillage. I'm not going to say no till, because I've been farming all my life. There are times when you need to till, whether it's with a spade, a fork, or a rake. I don't care what you're going to use, but there's times when you have to turn that soil around because something's gone weird, and then you have to start again. Here's a true story. This happened to my friend Chris Butcher in Ontario last year, the year before. His lambs were not doing well, and they're out with their mothers on the pasture. And he's conventional animal nutritionist guy, because he still has one coming to his farm, although he's been biodynamically farming or biodynamically certified sheep farmer for 25 years, 30 years now, contrary to his father's way of doing it way back. His conventional animal nutritionist noticed a protein problem in all the feed around, not just his farm. All the animals were having a protein problem in their feed. And he suggested to farmers that they feed their animals with the feed produced the previous year, which is a commonsensical idea. Solve the problem. But knowing that light, which we increase by the light forces we capture with silica, which is the 501 spray, and how it plays a important role in the substance production of plants. To just touch on that one, calcium works with the formative forces of a plant. So when you look at any plant, the shape of the plant, the way that the building blocks were put together, the DNA of what that plant should look like, that is lying in the calcium forces. Calcium is the building blocks. Even in the conventional world, we say you haven't got enough calcium in your soil. That's the building blocks of the plant, the bricks. Right, well, I'm not talking about bricks as in BRIX, that's sugar counting, but the bricks as in building blocks. Calcium is that part. Silica, however, is to do with the substance in plants. So what its nutritional value would be, what protein it would have, and things like that. So knowing that there's a problem with the feed, according to the nutritional conventional guy, he's picked up all around in that part of Ontario, the feed hasn't got the right protein. And to have the right protein, you've got to have the right substance going on in the plant, in the fodder. And knowing that silica plays that role as a biodynamic farmer, you see that little bit of knowledge that he had of how the formative forces work. And having noticed that the air was very clouded due to fire smoke that year, meaning that there wasn't the same volume of sunlight as usual, he got out his thinking box, and then he got out his toolbox called the biodynamic preparations. He sprayed 501, the horn silica. It was stirred, energized, volatilized, and he sprayed it on, and the sheep's lambs healed completely. No more ill, no more death. All the other farmers around were still having the same problem. His problem was solved. So you were asking me if I had a living example, Natalie. There's a living example. Okay. I think it's a brilliant one. What I really like about it is that it's not just biodynamic. It's using the knowledge coming from the conventional guy, using the knowledge of the organic world, it's using everything, because we're not separate. We are the same. We're all farming for a living. We're all trying to produce good quality food. There isn't one better than the other. It's just what we can use to do better. Here's a verse from Dr. Rudolf Steiner, which is one of my favorites. To resolve our past requires knowledge, we've been talking about. To forge our future, we need courage, because we could sometimes make some choices that don't make you nervous. To experience the present, we must develop dedication. Our thinking needs riddles to wake up. Our feeling needs pain to mature. Our willing needs resistance to become strong. Thank you. That's my favorite cow, by the way. She used to be on my farm in South Africa.
Thank you, Robby. That's really powerful. I love how deep you went into the connection with, I'll say, the cycle and the beingness of the cow, because I think it's so easy to skip over what we don't know.
Yeah.
And even walking around our farm in barefoot, they're walking around the perimeter of our farm in barefoot. I mean, how many farmers even go barefoot on their farm, period, anymore, right?
In other words, steel toe caps, man.
Yeah, right. And yeah, we keep our shoes on and our boots on because our feet are too sensitive. Well, what if we took our shoes off? What if we wiggled our toes in the soil and felt the dew of the grass on our skin?
But that's very close to home. Remember on Monday we were at the conference at our AGM?
Yeah.
There's two guys walking around with no shoes on.
Yeah.
Your father and Thomas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thomas is always barefoot on his farm. And you also took your shoes off, eh? Yeah. Good girl. But whenever I visit Thomas up there, he's never got shoes on. It's got to be freezing cold before he puts on boots.
Yeah. Yeah.
He knows, a lovely little story, and then people can hit us with as many questions they want to. In South Africa, in the semi-desert, I was using compost teas in my herb growing, but we're talking about a 2,000 hectare farm land, like outback Australia type stuff. And we're cultivating on 100 hectares. And that's what I was spraying with my compost teas. And then the biodynamic preps with it. And I had South African First Nation, commonly known as Bushmen, the San, 3 of them working on my farm. And we were walking down the road, which is outside of the fence, still on the farm, but not in the fenced area where we spray the preps. And they sit and they walk bare feet. They're always bare feet. I couldn't walk bare feet there. There were so many thorns, I would go lame. But their feet were like rubber, they could walk there. And they're walking along and they asked me the question, why is it that here where we're walking, when it rains, which is maybe once every 2 years, it becomes, for want of a better word, slimy or snotty. It comes up between your toes. And when it's dry, it's like rock. But on that side of the fence, when we wet it with irrigation, we can walk there. It doesn't do that. It doesn't squeeze up between your toes. And when it dries out, it's still cooler. It's not hot and hard like a rock here. It's cooler and we can walk on it. Our feet don't burn. And it's not dusty. They'd noticed it. And it was the microbial activity because we've been putting it there for 2 years. And because we managed the soil properly, we had a spongy layer, and 2 meters from it, we had nothing because it was a road. There was no spraying on it. There was it was just, we were constantly driving on it. So it was a compact piece of earth. They could feel the difference because they didn't wear shoes.
Oh, I just love that, Robby. I love so many things about that. And one of the things I want everyone to really take in is the difference that was noticed just feet apart. Because a lot of the conversation in the farming and gardening space, and even in the consumer space, is well, it doesn't matter what you do because there's so much chemicals used everywhere anyways. It's going to be on the food that you grow or the soil that you're using. So why bother?
Yeah.
That's why you bother, because there's actually a difference, like feet apart, even inches apart. You can see where the biology changes. It's so powerful.
Yep.
That's a good story.
So, I mean, I don't know. We haven't done lots of time, but we've done a reasonable. I think what I was hoping to get across is that the biology and the biodynamics is all one thing, and we're not stuck in the microscope. We have the microscope, but we can't ignore either. They both play a role because they're both working together all the time.
And what are some ways that you measure those natural forces that we can't really see?
How do we measure them?
What are some ways that you personally measure them? What do you notice? What do you look for?
Well, in the microscope world, I can use that to see the biomass of different soils. I sample soils all the time for guys, and you can then learn from what you see in the microscope as to, using the soil food web knowledge, which Dr. Elaine Ingham put together over 40 years of work. She didn't just sit there and guess the stuff. She's tried everything. And it's a working factor. We know it. The biodynamic side is not just what was written 100 years ago. It's what's been practiced by biodynamic farmers for 100 years successfully. Your papa is one of them. You're one of them. So we know it works. The measurement of success in biological and biodynamic biological work, because if you're doing biodynamic farming, you're farming biological, by the way. You have no option because you're relying on the natural living forces, which we've already just explained includes cosmic and microbial. They work together. So the biggest measurement, I think, for it is not me on the microscope measuring biomass. That's one specific measurement of what I see is happening under the earth. But the end product, for people that don't use the Christian Bible, they won't know it if they've never read it, but there it is somewhere written that you will know them by their fruits. So you will know the farm by its fruits, because when you pick or eat an apple, you made a beet salad the other day and it was delicious. I get my favorite vegetables from my garden or from Thomas up at the top. I'm sure there's 1,000 people in the city that go straight to your dad and your brother's stands at the marketplace because they're drawn to it, not because they're different, it's because they know it tastes better. It has a different flavor, and I think it's the one place where we do not have nutritional, what's that thing? I mentioned it earlier.
Bricks?
No, we have the Brix count would be there. But the exudates, the natural exudates that plants produce, those sugars that we speak of, they're very complex. We only know a little bit about them. But plants communicate with microbes through exudates at the root zone. We can talk about that one day. There's a whole communication going on. I always told my students in Scotland to consider the rhizosphere is a shopping mall. And the microbes pull in from the world, which is Earth, and they come to that shopping mall, which is the rhizosphere of the root of a plant, which is getting the energy from the sun. The plant's just a solar panel. She gets all the energy from the sun, turns it into fancy, very intricate sugars, exudates, and by putting them out at a certain point in that shopping mall, can design what she wants them to bring as payment. So if she wants a little bit of calcium on that specific spot, that's where she puts out the exudate that pays for calcium, and that's what the microbes bring. Literally, that's what's happening down there all the time in a healthy soil. So you're not putting out steroids called fertilizer, and the plant will suck it up. When you get your soil properly balanced and you're growing a biodynamic crop that's standing well, that's what's happening. The plant is controlling what she wants, where she wants it, when she wants it, how much she wants. And I keep saying she. I suppose there's males too, but they decide what they want to eat and where they need it to be healthy. It's not just an overabundance of food. So yeah, fertilizing the earth with water-soluble synthetic fertilizer gives you a very good standing crop with very low nutritional value.
Lazy, it gives you lazy plants.
Yes, but it's the same as what happens with our people. Our people that are eating the abundance of conventional food are in the hidden hunger. They're putting on weight, they're looking fine, they're big, they've got lots of everything, but this isn't functioning the way it should. This isn't functioning the way it should. All the bits and pieces, the intricate bits are not functioning properly. And usually, most inevitably, some other disease comes along because the body is not perfectly strong. It's not in balance. So a conventional crop of maize standing GMO, this high, beautiful, green, fantastic. Yes, it harvests the tons off the hectare, but it's feeding the cow something that it doesn't need, and then the cow's milk is not what it should be, the cheese you make from that, and etc. It's a chain reaction. So fertilizer produces that low nutrition world. A lot of abundance, but not much content. The biological world working in balance biodynamically, which is living change, dynamic life, biodynamic, constantly changing, selecting what it needs, where it needs it, in the right quantity. That's what's a balanced, healthy plant. And they give off exudates at the roots, but they also give off exudates above the ground, which keeps away things that shouldn't be coming to them. An insect can't see a bad plant, can only sense it. If the plant is in perfectly well-balanced protein, it pings off, I use the word ping, it resonates with the insect that it's healthy, the insect leaves it alone. If it's not healthy, the insect will attack it. It's the job. It needs to attack, kill that plant. It needs to break down, become organic matter so that the soil quality can improve for the next plant. It's the cycle. And yes, somewhere in between there, we need a crop.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Man, it's just so powerful. It amazes me how every time in every conversation, I can still just be so awed by have just deepening my understanding around how powerful plants are and how intelligent they are and how Like the visual that came to mind was eating all these, you know, like lower nutritious plants, lazy plants. And so it's like you actually get to choose like what battery pack we're eating. Are we going to eat from
Yeah,
a battery pack that might have like little amount of energy, or are you going to eat from a battery pack that's going to like fuel you and give you the energy that you need throughout the day and help your
yeah.
muscles go stronger? So it's this complete paradigm shift in awareness around how powerful it is, how we're feeding our plants. So
Mm,
thank you for that, Robby.
mm. Yeah, you can also measure it by when you eat a really good piece of like Tilo on the Nova Scotia. One of his products is his own biodynamic rye, and he makes a beautiful rye bread.
Mhm.
That's all they make. And you eat 2 slices of that bread at breakfast time. At 1 o'clock, they say, all right, we'll go for lunch now. And you go, oh, lunch, yes. When they say the word lunch, then you're ready for food. But until then, you weren't. And you can eat a
Yeah.
half a loaf of normal conventional bread, and an hour later, you're looking for something to eat because there's nothing there.
Yeah, so true. One of my favorite stories is from my sister Rosanna. She was at university and she had a bunch of roommates who were guys, and then guys who came over to have food with her, and they she'd be like, how many sandwiches do you want? They're like, I don't know, like six. Or she's like, six. So she's like, how about you start with just like one or two? So she'd make them a couple sandwiches or give them the bread, and it was organic bread that she had, and they'd eat like one or two sandwiches and they would just be stuffed. They're like, I can't believe how little I ate. I have like 6 or 7 sandwiches, and I actually couldn't eat anything more if I even
Yeah,
tried, because they're so full from
yeah.
just, one or two.
So you see, people say the food is so expensive, the organic food,
Mhm.
but you eat less of it.
That's
You
right.
know, you probably eat 25% less food when you're eating organic food.
Yeah.
Do that to the price. When you see the price, take off 25% and see if it's still expensive.
Yeah. So true. There's a question here, Robby, about landscaping fabric. Can I ask it to you? Elizabeth asked, where is somewhere to find more details on the use of landscape fabric and how to balance the aerobic and anaerobic soil? So how to use it effectively and efficiently if you're going to choose to use it.
Well, I don't know. There's probably a couple of different places, but you could certainly ask a question like that to the Soil Food Web. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised even if a guy like Jean-Martin Fortier would have some good insights by now. He's done a
Mhm.
lot of ground covers.
Yeah, and I think,
Um,
go ahead, sorry.
no, I was just thinking maybe if you were to go to a local good organic farmer, a guy who's done market gardening for a while, because you're talking market gardening now. Big farmers don't use ground covers like that, but market gardeners do. It's a sensible thing to do. And
Mhm.
one or two of them will tell you what they find. But the bottom line is really just think of the breathing. Earth does breathe. And so you do need it to breathe. So if you're smothering yourself with a plastic bag, you're not going to live very long. If you have a couple of holes in the plastic bag, you'll get more air through. I tend to use woven weed fabric because the one that they use in nurseries,
Mhm.
it's got those lines on it. For one, it's easier to cut it straight because it's got the lines on it. And I actually learned it from Jean-Martin Fortier. You take a little blue flame, your little gas can, and just singe the edge when you've cut it, because then it melts together and it doesn't fray. It stays forever. I prefer the woven fabric.
Mhm.
It lets water through, it lets air through, but it doesn't let weeds germinate. So from that point of view,
It's
the
good
one
to
that
have.
you'll often find them using when they cover a bed and they plant the brassicas into it, it's a woven fabric.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's my preferred one.
Mhm. Yeah, and then you're not getting the massive the anaerobic soil underneath
Not
it
at all.
at
No,
all.
it'll breathe all the way.
Yeah. You can go, if you haven't already checked out Robby's website, you can go to albaorganics.ca and you can find him there. And he has his email and his phone number. He's readily available. He's an awesome farm consultant because he's walked the path of being a farmer himself and having his hands in the soil. He's in all kinds of different composting, from biodynamics to vermicomposting to thermal composting, static composting. So if you have composting questions, he is a person, probably one of the people to go and ask and have a conversation
You're
with.
blowing a big bubble here. Hey,
Okay, well, okay.
I mustn't disappoint anybody.
Good. Well, you're good at, well, here's the thing too, Robby, which I love about you is you throw it back on the people who ask the question, right? So it's not just feeding them information. You arm them with tools and resources and a thinking cap of being the observer of their farm. So it's not like you're not a one-stop shop. If you're gonna fix everything, people are going to walk away with more tools in their belt.
Well, every farm is unique. Every field is unique, and every family that's on that farm is unique. So there isn't a one fit all. It doesn't. There's no one size fits all for anything.
Right.
You've got to find the right fit.
Yeah, so
So
true.
my work is very interesting. My main job is to help farmers do their farming better with less inputs from outside. That's what they're trying to do. And I don't go there because I'm telling them what to do. I go there because they're asking me, I'd like to do this. How can I do it? Can you help me work it out? I'm not going to work it out for you. I'm going to help you work it out. Because
what's the most challenging situation you've ever seen?
I'm gonna speak broadly. I'm gonna say lack of water.
And how
When
do you
you're
solve
trying
that?
to do everything perfectly well, and then suddenly there's just not enough water, you're gonna have a hard time doing anything that doesn't have enough water. You can't keep the soil moist. You can't keep the life going. So like it's a big challenge in Alberta area where the reclamation of oil well sites, for example, one of the biggest hassles. It's hot and dry. So, and you've got a season this long. Those are tricky bits, you know. They've compacted that area to hell. You've got to decompact it. You've got to get it organic matter into it. You've got to get seeds in it. And then where's the moisture? So yeah, that's tricky. Short season, lack of water. That's probably when it gets tough.
And so what are you doing to work through that? And what's working well?
Well, I think you've got to maybe give yourself more time. In other words, do the preparation this year, the physical preparation, and then do the planting later in the year or earlier in the next year when you can, because you can't go and fix a soil that's wet and then plant. You can't fix soil when it's wet. You've got to wait for it to be semi-dry or dry. If you want to undo compaction physically, it must be bone dry. You can't put a ripper through butter. It doesn't go. I mean, it just makes grooves. If you want to break compacted soil, it's got to be rock hard so that it bursts when you put the energy through it. And then when you've done that, you don't want to wet it and walk all over it. It's just going to push it back down again. So you've got to time it maybe. Do certain sections of work in a certain climate and then wait for the next climate to be right before the next job happens. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you're a farmer making a living out of that, it might be good for you to just change completely your style of farming. But if it's for a reclamation purpose, it's messed up already. It's not going to matter if it takes 2 or 3 years to unmess it up. On a farming side, if you've got less water, you need to use less area, and it might be better for you to do something like working undercover where you don't lose all the moisture.
So, Robby, people can get their biodynamic preparations from local biodynamics associations. So if you're looking for biodynamic preps and you're not able to make them yourself, you can reach out to a local biodynamic associations or groups or garden clubs near you, and they often have them or have or know where to find them. JPI Institute in the States is also a good source. But what about if I'm a farmer or a gardener. I don't really have access to manure or horns or animal parts and that kind of thing to start making my own preps, but I want to start with something. What are some preps that might be like an easy entry point for me to start working with or making?
One that takes, unfortunately, a year, but you can usually find some nettle. There's usually nettle around, Utica doika, that thing that stings.
Yeah, stinging nettle.
You put that guy into a clay pipe and bury it, but you've got to do it for a year.
So you just
It
put it
needs
into
to
a
stay
clay
in the
pipe.
ground. You can do it now and then pick it up, in a year's time and see what it looks like.
So
So
a clay pipe or a clay pot or what
yeah,
exactly?
normally you can use a clay pot, but we normally took those what we call drainage pipes, those old clay pipes. You can use any unglazed pottery item. It's going to disappear. That's why if you do need to put some sort of a lid on it to close it from, not seal it, but just you don't want other soil and stuff getting into it. And it will deplete, but it becomes quite a beautiful material after a year of sitting there.
And what is nettle? What is that?
It's going to be very difficult to do something like yarrow flowers in stag bladder. It's difficult even for a good biodynamic guy to find a stag bladder. Hunters don't know what they are. I've asked a few of my hunting buddies to, hey, by the way, when you shoot a stag, can you bring me the bladder? And then they arrive here with the stomach, and I'm going, I want the bladder.
Yes.
Oh, what's that? So that's the more difficult one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And what is this nettle preparation used for? What is it known to?
It's one of the preparations that you put into the compost pile.
Mm.
So nettle has very high potassium and iron, and it is also part of the silica world, because those little stingers, the thing that, if you look at a nettle leaf with a magnifying glass, you'll see the stingers are little shiny white spikes. They're basically silica. And so there's a lot of silica in there. And when you look at the preps and you look at the plants that you use in the preps, you must also look at the form of the plant. Look at its behavior, because the plant, we use a yarrow flower, Achillea millefolium, the yarrow, which is a very strong, upright plant with like a strong, sturdy flower. If you pick the leaflet of a yarrow and you look at the tiny little leaflet of the leaf, it looks and resembles stag horns. It's just a little bunch of lots of little stag horns stuck on the leaf. So they look the same. They behave the same. They're upright. When you see a stag in the field, it's usually seen you before you've seen it. And it stands up straight and then it's off. There's a lot of vuma and life in there. It's the same with the yarrow plant. Out in the garden now, everything else around it didn't make it, but the yarrow is busy growing and it's going to shoot up one of these days. Valerian I've got outside the house here is a massively strong, upright plant with a high phosphorus light sort of flower on the top. Soon we'll pick them. The dandelions, you got to be quick off the mark if you want to get dandelion flowers. They're just about finished already. Yeah, by us anyway. They're foolhardy. They don't stop. They keep on coming back. You mow them down and the leaves are gone, and they'll send out things with flowers on them. They're very strong. They're persistent. So we can have a talk about preps one day, but there's more to the prep than just the fancy ideas of how they get the formative forces and all that put together. You actually need to see the plant DNA and how it compares with what you want to get from it. And why would a guy like Rudolph have chosen those specific plants? They're weeds, right? They're weeds.
Mhm.
What's the definition of a weed? I asked that question when I was teaching in Scotland, and they give you all kinds of answers. But one of the most common answers is a plant in a place where you don't want it to be.
Right.
And like most people don't want dandelions on their lawn. I don't mind them. I like them being there. It's a lot
Yeah.
prettier than green.
Same. I call it my edible lawn.
Yeah.
Um, Robby, I just want to put a plug in for something that you're working on right now, which is the biodynamic course. You're doing a
Yeah.
full certification biodynamic course,
Yeah.
which is hopefully launching this fall.
I
And
hope. Yeah.
yeah, and so can you tell us a little bit about that and how we can learn about that? If that's something, if we want to
So,
learn more, study
yeah,
biodynamics.
I can't yet put a lot of information out there because it is a course that the Rudolf Steiner College of Canada, which is based in Toronto, so you can RSCC. They decided to work with Demeter, which is the certifying body for biodynamics. So Demeter Canada, also based down there in Guelph. They're working together in collaboration to using a course that is being delivered in England. They've adopted it. The college in England was kind enough to give it, but we've had to adapt it. So my job for the last year and a half has been part-time, a couple of hours a week, to adapt it to work in Canada. Because like earlier on today, I was working on a Zoom call with another BC lot, and they had a map of BC which swallowed up the whole of Britain and a piece of Holland and France all together, and then there's still a whole lot of sea available, and that's just BC. So the dynamics of students and connections across Canada is a little bit different to across England. Anybody can go to a thing on a weekend, you get on a train and off you go. Here it'll take you the week to get there. So or a big expensive airplane flight. So we've worked on it, and we have to register it by the career, because it's a career course, meaning that when you've done that course, you should be proficient at least to be able to get a job in that line. And for that, it needs to be certified by the Ontario government. Every province has their own career people, but because the college is based in Ontario, it's the Ontario government that has to approve it. That it's got to the point now where the application's gone in, and I am busy ironing out all the creases with the lady from that government until she's happy that everything's exactly the way it needs to be. And when that is done, I don't know when, they'll approve it, and then we can actually start advertising and roll out. But I'm hoping that it'll be this fall, because we've got to start it at the same time as the English course starts, so that when there's a Zoom lesson happening, it's happening at the same time. It might mean that many of the Canadian students will have to be doing a class in the middle of the night or something like that, but you can sleep in the day.
That's right. That's right. So that's something to look forward to if you want to learn more about biodynamics.
And then, of course, all the practical side of it is going to be in farms in Canada. So
yeah, exciting, really exciting. Well, thank you so much, Robby, for your time today and helping connect us with the biology of biodynamics and how it's not just the biology of what we can see in the soil and the plants that we see growing in the land that we're working with. It's all the stuff that we can't see as well. The magic of nature and the life
living forces.
Yeah, the magic of the living force is so powerful, because I really felt like you did a good job of connecting that with us today and with our ethos and with our hearts. And I felt like, I don't know if anyone else in the room felt like they could see what they couldn't see, but what they can't see, but I really could feel it and I could see it. And I could, especially when you talked about the vortex, the vortex of the water when it's stirred and the energy that's going down and being pulled into that, and how that shows up in nature in the spirals and the pine cones and in the flowers, and in the weather, you know, in the cyclone.
It's everywhere.
It's absolutely everywhere. So thank you for helping us make those connections and deepen into that
More than
awareness.
welcome.
Yeah, appreciate
Take a hat
it.
off to Dr. Rudolf Steiner, who made us aware
Right.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are curious, if you have not picked up or read Rudolf Steiner's agriculture lectures, they're on Audible, or you can find them there are probably a lot of different libraries. You can also get the PDF online. There's also some, if you search it, you can find his work. What else I was going to say? Robby, I want to say thank you again for carving out the space and being so generous with your wisdom and with what you've learned and what you're learning. And I look forward to learning more from you, and maybe having you back again, talking more about preparations and practical stuff.
We just need the time. So
exactly.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And good luck to everybody with what they're doing. It's planting time. Get on with it.
Yes. So if you want to make sure that to stay in touch with them, then please then go to their websites and their social media and follow them and show them love in that way. You guys make yourself an amazing day. Big love, bright blessings. We appreciate you. We love you.